Well, good morning, Arise Church. It's a pleasure to be with you this morning. I happen to know Scotty through a group of pastors that meet together, and everybody loves Scotty. Do you guys find that to be true? So every pastor I know loves Scotty, so I am considering you a very blessed church to have him as your pastor. What do you want to know about me? Let's see. I met my husband in Bible school 30 plus years ago. We have two kids that are coming of age, an 18-year-old and a 20-year-old. I have 2 cats, 5 chickens, and a duck. Let's see. And I'm just pleased to be with you here this morning. This morning, we're not going to continue in John. We're just going to take a little detour and go back to Habakkuk. And since Habakkuk is hard to find, I thought I'd tell you now so that you can start looking in your Bible for it. It's kind of tucked in there, Nahum, Habakkuk. In my Bible, it's page 806, so, kind of right around there. It's probably easier to find on your phone. Luckily, Habakkuk's only 3 chapters, and I'm just going to cover the last one of those chapters today. My question for you this morning is, what do you want? Maybe it's the new iPhone. Maybe you'd like a life partner. Maybe you'd like to get into a house, right, in this economy. I want a hot tub. I haven't had one. I've been married, like I said, for almost 30 years. It seems like it's about time for a hot tub. Well, some of you may think, I don't really have a material need. I've got my food, I've got a nice place to stay. I'm not a material-focused person. But let's be honest, we all have things that we want from God, aren't there? Maybe you want reconciliation in your marriage. You want your husband to address his porn issue. You want your wife to want to reconcile with you. Maybe you want your kids to come back to Christ or follow Christ. Maybe you want to be able to use your talents in ministry to serve Him. Maybe you want some kind of healing, physical healing, emotional healing. There's things that we all want from God. Or maybe on a bigger scale, you want our country to get along, to have more unity. You want to see racial reconciliation. You want our country to be more God-fearing. You'd like us to be at a place where we feel sure about the economy and our future prosperity as a country. Maybe you want a good solution for immigration. There's things that we want, and they might be very different. We might want things on the different end of the spectrum from each other, but there are things that we want from God. And Habakkuk was no different. He wanted things from God too. You see, he looked around at his fellow people group, the Israelites, and he was part of the nation of my mind's going blank. What part? Nation of Judah, the southern portion of the kingdom of Israel. And he looked around him and he saw that there was a lot of corruption, there was injustice, that his own people group, which were supposed to be the people of God, weren't following God at all. And he wanted that to change. Like many prophets in the Old Testament, he was concerned for the state of the soul of his nation. And I would dare say we have that same concern probably for the state of the soul of our nation. We would love to see more hearts return to Jesus that live in the United States of America. And so Habakkuk brings his concern to God, and that's what his little 3-chapter book in the Bible is about. He brings his concern to God in the chapter 1, and God says, guess what? I'm not going to answer your request. I'm not going to help turn the hearts of your people back to God. Instead, I'm going to bring the baddest, worstest people ever, people that are way more evil than your country, and I'm going to allow them to conquer you. That was not the answer Habakkuk wanted. That was the worst news ever. And so today we're going to look at the book of Habakkuk to find, how did Habakkuk find comfort in the midst of not getting what he wanted? Just as an aside, Habakkuk's name actually means hug or embrace, but not like a hug that I might give to my husband or my kiddos, a hug like the warm embrace of something when you need shelter from a storm, that kind of hug. When you need the comfort of knowing I'm in a safe, secure place. And what we're going to find through the book of Habakkuk, we're only looking at chapter 3 because I'm not going to keep you here all day. But what we find is he found that. Through his struggle with God, through his wrestle with God, he found comfort and shelter. He found warmth from being in even though he was still in a situation where he wasn't getting what he wanted, and the outcome was not going to be pretty. Well, I'm thinking back now. It's been about 8 years when our daughter was 12 years old and she started club volleyball. Any of you participate in club sports or have kids in club sports at any time? Shelby? It's an alternate universe, let's just say that. It's a world of too high of competition for too little of girls, and my little 12-year-old, she was tiny. We couldn't even find the right size volleyball shorts because she was too little. And they start them at 12, and they compete against girls who are 14, which is only 2 years difference, but it's night and day. And so there's bigger girls they're playing against who actually have the skills down. And you're cheering for your team because you want your little girl to do so well. And they're trying to get the basic skills down. Like for a lot of girls at 12, getting the power behind the ball to hit it hard enough that it actually goes over the net instead of under the net is a big deal at that age. And so as a parent, you're cheering your kids on. And one of the things I noticed that we just happened to cheer a lot wasn't true back in the days when I was actually a cheerleader, but it was a trend, I guess, 8 years ago. We would say, "You got this." And so our little sweetie would get up there to serve or would be in the back row waiting to receive the serve from the other team, and we would yell out their name and we would say, "You got this." And every girl that got up to serve, we're trying to remind them that you have worked on this in practice, that take a deep breath and you can do this. One day I was sitting in the stands and I realized, let's just call her Sadie, because that's her real name. Sadie was up to serve, and I was thinking, Sadie doesn't have this. Sadie hasn't made a serve over the net even in practice. Why are we yelling at Sadie, "You've got this"? Now we know psychologically why we're yelling this. There might be a miracle on the court. But here we are as parents yelling out, "You got this, Sadie, you got this." And I'm thinking, no, she doesn't. It's gonna hit the net if it even makes it there, just like it does every time. And while at that age the coaches are a little bit generous in giving people the chance to serve during a game, that goes away over the years, even if they know they can't make it. As a parent, you're like, we really need this point. Can Sadie sit on the bench, please? What we're gonna find is that it's different with God. God really does have it. God's got it, and we can take comfort in that. And that's what Habakkuk experiences as he wrestles with God, as he's received this really bad news, that what he hoped for his nation, that is a return to right living before God, was not going to happen. And instead, he and his whole country were going to have to live through years of oppression, torture, removal from their lands, subjugation. And so today we're going to look at how did Habakkuk comfort himself and remember that God's got this. All right, well, turn with me to Habakkuk 3. And I got to tell you about a little change in my life. I used to always preach with the Bible right here, but now I can't see it anymore unless I put on my reading glasses. So I'm going to put my Bible down, and I printed the verses really big on my paper so I can see it. If you're under 40, you'll get here one day, but I'm right in between the vision issue here. But we're looking at Habakkuk chapter 3. And if you've walked with Jesus for a while and you've been in Bible studies, you are probably very familiar with verses 17 through 19. Those are the good ones. Those are the ones that you're going to see on an Instagram post, or you're going to see maybe printed up to put on your wall. But I'm actually going to spend very little time there. We're actually going to look at chapter 3, starting from the beginning. This chapter is a song. Starts with a little tiny prayer in verse 2. It's also a different literary style than the rest of the book, the previous 2 chapters. The previous 2 chapters are dialogue and lament, and this is a song. And so you think with a song, it's full of metaphors, right? It's full of images, and I'm going to try to draw in images and metaphor as I share with you about this passage today. So you're going to have to put your imagination caps on, maybe as opposed to your literal caps on. But chapter 3 is responsive to the revelation that Habakkuk has received in chapter 1 and 2. All right, verse 1. A prayer of Habakkuk the prophet on, can anyone pronounce that word? On Shigionoth. A prayer of Habakkuk the prophet on Shigionoth. Shigionoth is probably instructions for the tune or the musical setting, or most likely it's an encouragement to the listeners to sing this one with gusto. It's like the music leader saying, okay, let's sing it out now because this is a good one. And we're going to find out why this is a good one. The next verse, verse 2, Lord, I have heard of your fame. I stand in awe of your deeds, Lord. Repeat them in our day. In our time, make them known. In wrath, remember mercy. What this verse is doing is introducing the main themes of the rest of the song. It's a prayer. He's saying, I'm going to tell you about how in awe of God I am. I'm going to remember some of the things God did, how he acted in the past. And honestly, I want God to act this way now. In fact, as an aside, this whole song that we're going to look at might be a subtle form of protest. And maybe you can relate to this when you've been going through a hard time or wanting something from God that it doesn't seem like he's going to give you. You're saying, God, come on, I know you can do this. Why won't you do it now? And isn't that how we feel sometimes? We've seen somebody else healed from cancer, and we say, God, I know you have creation power. You can change every cell in their body. Why won't you do it now? And that is what Habakkuk is feeling. I've seen you change people's hearts. I've seen you work in the nation of Israel. Why won't you do it now? And isn't that frustrating? Sometimes. Every time. The last little phrase of this verse, in wrath, remember mercy, could mean 2 things. He knows what's coming. The Babylonians are going to defeat his people group, the nation of Judah. And he's saying, I know, God, what you've decided to do through the Babylonians, and it's going to be terrible, but would you go light on us? Have some mercy on us. We deserve it, but have some mercy. Or, actually theologians are divided on this, it could mean, I'm actually remembering that you are going to show wrath eventually to the Babylonians. And I can't wait for the day, because they really deserve it. So you get to decide, which one do you think it is? All right, verse 3 starts the song. From here on out, we're going to see example after example of how God has got this. So take comfort. Okay, verse 3 says, God came from Teman, the Holy One from Mount Paran. I got to tell you, that's kind of meaningless to me because I don't know what the heck Teman is and I don't know where Mount Paran is. So it's helpful to kind of look and figure out where those things are. Teman is in the south, a wilderness region, and that's where God first revealed himself to his people. Mount Paran, it would be more familiar to you if it said Mount Sinai, which is exactly the same thing. So we're a little more familiar with Mount Sinai. We know that that is where God met with Moses. And while there's some bad things kind of connected with that season in the Israelites' life, like the golden calf, if you've been following along the Bible for a while, you know that whole story. We're not going there. But there were some really beautiful things that happened at Mount Sinai as well. It was where God made it clear that he wanted to have a relationship with his people. And Habakkuk is saying, remember, this is where you found us. This is where you initiated this relationship with us. And he is remembering that God really showed up for the nation of Israel. So where have been the times in your life where God has really shown up for you? Where has been your Teman or your Mount Paran? I'm going to give you just 20 seconds to think about that. A time in your life when God revealed himself to you, where he showed up and you knew he was present. I remember when my father was dying, it was inevitable that the situation would end in death. And I remember having an overwhelming sense of things are going to be okay. That didn't come from Carolyn. That came from God, reassuring me, he's got this. You're going to be okay. I remember a season in my marriage when I had little kids and I just thought, I have no more love for this man. I am so done with him. I mean, all the love I had at the altar, it had vanished by then. And I thought, I can't produce any more love inside my heart for this person. And I said, God, I need you to produce it inside of me because it's just not there anymore. And I saw him do that. I saw him help me learn to love and experience feelings of love after a season those feelings had gone away. It's important that we, just like Habakkuk, look back on those seasons in our lives when God showed up. Because there might be a moment in the present where we don't feel his presence and he's not giving us the answer we want to our situations. Verse 4. His splendor was like the sunrise. Rays flashed from his hands where his power was hidden. From here on out, in this song, we're going to start to see more and more metaphors, more and more images that are going to paint a picture of a powerful God who's got this. And we see him being compared to the sunrise, that he reaches everywhere. We see rays of power emanating from his hand. That word rays is the same word used to describe the rays emanating from Moses' face when he came down from the mountain. It's a display of glory and power. Verse 5, plague went before him. Pestilence followed his steps. I haven't heard a worship song recently with these terms in them, although maybe we could make a request. What we're picturing here is plague and pestilence are personified, like actual people, kind of like those, when you're driving down the road and there's those half houses going down the road, mobile homes, I think, or something like that, and there's the car behind them with the lights and the car in front of them with the lights. This is an image of God, and as he strolls onto the scene and he wants to create destruction, plague and pestilence are his entourage. Nothing can stop him. This is in contrast to the Canaanite gods, where each god usually had their one thing big deal. So they were like God of the sea or God of the plague. And what this picture is painting is, oh, no. Our God isn't just a one thing God. He's an everything God. And if he wants to destroy something, plague and pestilence are just his entourage. We're getting a powerful picture of a God who's got this. Verse 6, he stood and shook the earth. He looked and made nations tremble. Throughout the rest of this prayer, we're going to see the earth, creation itself, actually responding to the power and might of God. And as the song continues to ramp up, we see God portrayed as more and more powerful. In fact, as he stands, he shakes the earth. He's like a King Kong, just like boom, boom. And the next verse, or the second half of this verse, continues that image of God like a massive King Kong. The ancient mountains, which would be referring to the high places. These are places where people gave their allegiance to other gods, where they turned away from God and chose something else. The ancient mountains crumbled. That word actually means they like turned to dust. With just one of his footsteps, it's like, whew, it's gone. The hills, again, the age-old hills, images to those high places where people were choosing other things but God to center their life around. They collapsed. That word means more than just like fell over, like we think of it in English, but it means to completely vanish, to melt away like an ice cube on a hot day. But he marches on forever. We're getting this image of a powerful God that's got this. When we see God in this light, we are reminded that everything else is temporary. Verse 7 here, again, not particularly meaningful unless you know what several of the words are. I saw the tents of Cushan in distress, the dwellings of Midian in anguish. We're seeing that not only did nature and creation respond to the presence of God, but other nations as well. So the nation of Cushan and the nation of Midian responded. He's actually referencing a time in Israel's past when these two nations had come to conquer and were successful at conquering to some level Israel, and God eventually took these nations down. And the point is that any invading conqueror working contra to the will of God is at incredible risk themselves. Maybe Habakkuk by this point in his song had reconciled himself to the fact this outcome is not going to be what I want it to be. The Babylonians really are going to come and conquer my people, but I know ultimately God will bring justice even to my oppressors. In verse 8, we come to a rhetorical question. Were you angry with the rivers, Lord? Was your wrath against the streams? Did you rage against the sea when you rode your horses and your chariots to victory? The rhetorical answer is no. Of course, God's not upset with the rivers or the streams. That's not what his anger is against. And we see a powerful picture of him coming in, riding on his chariot. He's like a gladiator, like Russell Crowe in Gladiator 1 as he rides in on his chariot, like a Roman with power and authority. In that day, chariots were your most advanced weapon. So it's like he is commanding at his hand the most advanced technological weapon of the day. So we have God as a King Kong, as a chariot riding warrior. And in verse 9, the picture, the metaphors just keep getting bigger and bigger. He says, you uncovered your bow. He unsheathed his bow to use it. It's kind of like a police officer. You know, he's got his gun, right? But when he unholsters it, the game is changing, right? And similarly, God has gotten out his bow, and it says he calls for many arrows, weapons to avenge the blood of his servants. You split the earth with rivers. That again is more of a King Kong metaphor. As he walks through the earth, creates earthquakes, rivers are created. And we see a God in this picture with his bow and arrow that he's kind of like Aragorn from Lord of the Rings. He's a ranger, a bowman, an archer who is effective. No one can stand against him, and we are reminded that God's got this, and I can take comfort. Verse 10, we see more examples of creation's response. We see the mountains saw you and writhed. Writhed is not a one-time past tense experience. It's a continual writhing. It's a lasting condition. In his presence, he evokes a response from nature itself. Torrents of water swept by. There's flooding. The deep roared. So we're thinking, oh, big storm, right? The deep in ancient literature was the source of chaos and massive power. And even the most massive creation power is scared. The word roared isn't roared like a lion's. It's the involuntary cry of horror. The waves, the sea itself, the biggest power that could come against somebody, rise and screams out involuntarily in horror. Again, the last part of this verse talks about the deep, the ocean's response, lifted its waves on high, kind of like giving up. I give up. Compared to the power of our God, I got nothing. Verse 11, we see more examples of creation responding to his presence. Sun and moon stood still in the heavens. What's a fear response? Freeze. Sun and moon, they're at attention. Oh my goodness. This King Kong, chariot riding, arrow slinging, powerful God that has everything at his disposal, even the sun and moon stand still. At the glint of your flying arrows, at the lightning of your flashing spear. Verse 12, in wrath you strode through the earth, and in anger you threshed the nations. We see again that King Kong image of God strolling through the nations. He's likely referring to anyone who hasn't been following Jesus are like two bundles of wheat, and God is going like this with them. And Habakkuk takes comfort. He says, I'm not following a little wimpy, weaselly God. I'm following a God that can make the wrong right. He's got this. Let's be honest, I'd like to see God do that sometimes in situations in my life, people in my life, maybe. But this is giving Habakkuk comfort. God's got this. Verse 13, you came out to deliver your people. He believes in the future end result that all things will be made right, even though he knows, he doesn't maybe know the duration, but for the next 70 years, his people are going to be under the subjugation of the Babylonians. He won't see it in his lifetime. You came out to deliver your people, to save your anointed one. You crushed the leader of the land of wickedness. Again, he's looking way in the future when he knows that evil will be conquered, that all the sin that we experience, whether that's from physical ailments, mental health ailments, broken relationships, will be made right. The last part of that verse, you stripped him, meaning the leader of the land of wickedness, from head to foot. When I read that with my English reading eyes, I think, oh, he took off his clothes. No, stripped means split in two from top to bottom, complete destruction. He's going to take care of the problem. There's images in this verse, too, of what God promises us in Genesis 3:15, that the head of Satan will be crushed. And we see that reverberating, that theme reverberating. God is going to crush evil once and for all. All will be made right. Verse 14, with his own spear you pierced his head, and his warriors stormed out to scatter us, gloating as though about to devour the wretched who were in hiding. Habakkuk may be coming more and more to terms with he and his people were going to be the wretched who were in hiding. And yet, he's taking hope in the future reality. Verse 15, you trampled the sea with your horses, churning the great waters. We're seeing images of what God did with Egypt here. And remember again, the sea or the deep was the biggest force of chaos in their minds. I don't know what you think is the biggest force of chaos. Could be something political, could be another nation. But he's saying, God's over that. God's got it. I love this quote by Martin Lloyd-Jones. I'm going to put it up there for you. Yeah. If God did not actually do the things recorded in the Old Testament for Israel, then the whole Bible may just be a piece of psychology meant to keep me happy. The Bible, however, plainly shows that my comfort and consolation lie in facts. The fact that God has done certain things and that they have literally happened. The God in whom I believe is the God who could and did divide the Red Sea and the river Jordan. The God that I want to heal my friend's cancer, the God that I want to heal my marriage, the God that I want to help me succeed financially and make it in this world, is the God who could and did divide the Red Sea. How Habakkuk found comfort in an untenable situation was by remembering that God's got it. And that's why when you come to verse 17 and 18 that you want to put in your wall or post on Instagram, you can get there. Verse 17 and 18, some of the most refreshing verses in the whole Bible. Though the fig tree does not bud, and there are no grapes on the vines, though the olive crop fails, and the fields produce no food, though there are no sheep in the pen and no cattle in the stalls, yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will be joyful in God, my Savior. When we read this verse, out of context of the entire struggle that Habakkuk has been experiencing in chapters 1 through 3, we can kind of think, oh, well, Habakkuk was like super spiritual. You know, even though the world's falling around beside him, he's just having a good attitude, and I therefore should just have a good attitude. And we can find it somewhat unrealistic. We can find it too much, or maybe I can't personally get there in my moment of sorrow or my extensive worries that I have. But the book in its entirety shows a man who is deeply, deeply struggling with the sinful reality around him. And isn't that true for us? We deeply struggle either with sinful realities in our own life, relationships that are broken, things that are not going the way that we want, illnesses that have befallen ourselves or others, or what's going around us in the wider world, how broken our world is. It's important to look back just a verse. In the previous verse to verses 17 and 18, verse 16, the first half, we read even after his 3 chapters of remembering the kind of God he serves. What does Habakkuk say about himself? He says, I heard and my heart pounded. My lips quivered at the sound. Decay crept into my bones and my legs trembled. I don't know if I mentioned, but I'm a therapist. That's a panic attack. Habakkuk has just finished 3 chapters of discussion with God where he is incredibly hugged. He's Habakkuked by truths about how powerful God is and the end plan. And he's still having a panic attack right before the beautiful verses. Right? Does that humanize him to us? Can you relate to that kind of emotional roller coaster? Well, 30 years ago, when I began my training as a therapist, somehow I may have listened to the professors wrong, but I thought the goal, like with anxiety, was to get rid of it. So I thought we were learning treatments and medications, and we're going to work with patients, and we're going to help them get rid of their anxiety so that they don't have it anymore. And you know, now I never try and get rid of people's anxiety. I work with people to help them learn how to live in the midst of it. And that's the message that we get from Habakkuk. You're not going to get rid of the worldly anxieties, are you? They're going to keep going as long as there is sin in this world. Our governments are going to continue to fail us. The people in our lives are going to continue to hurt us and fail us until kingdom come, as the old phrase goes. But we can take comfort in the midst of that. Even though we have moments of anxiety, we can take comfort because we serve a God who's got this. Let me pray as we close today. Dear God, these are truths easily spoken, hard to live out. We all feel the pressures from sin in our world, a broken world where things don't go right, where our hopes and dreams are often dashed, where evil is committed. And God, we need something to cling to take comfort, to cope with our panic attacks, to cope with the anxiety that is such a natural response to living in the world that we live in. Help us remember, like Habakkuk, the kind of God that you are, the acts of power and rescue that you have committed in the past, that you have done in our own lives, and the ultimate reality that we know is coming one day, that you will make all things right. We ask you for the faith to believe that. In Jesus' name, amen.